Good afternoon. A warm welcome from Geneva for this discussion on agile governance for the post-pandemic world. I'm Eric Dushek and I'm with the World Economic Forum. We are going through a period of enormous technological innovation and disruption. Long before the pandemic, regulators around the world were racing to respond to the opportunities and risks of fourth industrial revolution technologies from AI to self-driving cars. The COVID-19 crisis has reinforced the need for speed. Around the world, governments have been forced to fast-track changes to regulation to enable innovations from telemedicine to drone delivery to help their economies adapt to disruption. As we rebuild our economies, the time is now for us to find a new approach to rulemaking that enables us to seize the opportunities of new ideas, products, and business models while mitigating the risks. The World Economic Forum is working with the OECD to lead this change. Today, we have published a guide for regulators around the world on how they can introduce agile governance techniques like regulatory sandboxes in practice. And as we will show you in a moment, we have worked up a very special initiative with our business partners and the governments of Canada, Denmark, Italy, Japan, Singapore, the UAE, and the UK to help make it easier for businesses to introduce and scale innovations around the world while upholding public protections. If we get this right, we can unlock a world of possibilities: green technologies, new forms of mobility, AI-powered medical diagnostics, more choices for consumers, and more opportunities for our citizens. I'm really pleased to unlock these topics with our panel today for this discussion. I'm pleased to welcome here Chris Padilla, Vice President for Government and Regulatory Affairs at IBM. Welcome, Chris. Paola Pisano, Minister for Technological Innovation and Digitalization of Italy. Welcome, Minister. Diana Paredes, CEO and co-founder of Suede Labs. Welcome, Diana. And last but not least, Amanda Soloway, Minister for Science, Research and Innovation of the United Kingdom. And of course, our partner from the OECD, Deputy Secretary General Jeff Schlagenhauf. Welcome, Jeff, as well. On a technical note, this is an on-the-record session, and we have 45 minutes. And you can use the chat function to ask questions or make comments. And we will have a segment on that where we will try to address as much as we can. So before we go to the panel, though, let me introduce to you the Agile Nation. So please, video. If we have it.
Innovation and new technology is absolutely key to solving the challenges that we all face.
Widespread disruption from pandemic has made it even more pressing for countries to develop new engines of growth and business models, as well as pivot to greater digitalization.
Technology is continuously giving us new ways to live our lives, to interact with each other, to shape the world around us.
As a tech startup, we need governments to develop more flexible, interoperable regulatory frameworks so that we can introduce and scale up our ideas around the world.
How can we improve our governance and create a future governance that is more innovative, more agile, more resilient?
The COVID-19 pandemic has stressed the need for innovative solutions to the benefit of our societies.
Good rulemaking can enable the businesses to rapidly scale up, create good jobs, and allow emerging innovations to drive economic growth and also offer solutions.
We clearly have further to go to reform our rulemaking to make it easier for great ideas to enter our markets while mitigating the risks.
We need more flexibility in developing, applying, and enforcing regulations.
A fundamental rethinking of rulemaking is needed to realize the benefits of innovation.
Collaboration on flexible approaches to governing new emerging technologies is critical to help businesses bring responsible technology-enabled innovations to market and grow them globally.
Cross-border collaboration of regulators is the best way to avoid unnecessary divergence that could hamper innovation.
The time is ready to extend and apply the testing of agile regulation within the international cooperation among countries.
And it's through international regulatory cooperation that we're going to get the best to deliver for our economies and for our citizens. They have a right and we have an obligation to allow innovation to deliver for them.
今後このアジャイルネーションズの取り組みによって各国の経験が共有され、さらなるイノベーションが促進されることを期待をしております。私からは以上です。
And I congratulate all of you governments for launching Agile Nations Initiative.
This is a truly important initiative for us to be able to deliver to citizens across the globe.
And we are pleased to be part of such a group of innovative thinkers and actors.
We hope that the work of this network will set the path for agility and create the building blocks of resilience in tackling any future challenges in this highly uncertain world.
So congratulations to all involved on this exciting initiative. And let me go to our panelists. I'd like to start with Diana Paredes, CEO and co-founder of a fintech company, Suede Labs. Diana, in the film, we heard you say how important it is for governments to develop more flexible, interoperable regulatory frameworks. As a tech startup, can you explain why agile governance is important to you?
Yes, I guess that from our experience as a fintech, we do regulatory technology. So we are a regtech, and we have seen firsthand a lot of the goodwill that there is at government level and at regulatory level to actually do things in a way where the regulation is implemented that's in a very agile approach. Unfortunately, because of the way that the governance around this is not necessarily as agile as we would want it to be, that goodwill ends up having a lot of disproportionate consequences for the smaller companies. And so we really need regulation that fundamentally is designed thinking of the smaller players, because it is that diversity of smaller players that really brings for much better technology in the industry. And I think that when it comes to innovation, very much thrives to by diversity and creativity. So I think many startups that are actually developing some of the most innovative solutions are unfortunately really at the brunt of not necessarily the best regulation. So in many ways, from our perspective, the only way for governance to happen on technology in a way that actually benefits as well the smaller players is for startups to have a disproportionate voice in some of this governance, but fundamentally for the governance to be agile. It's really the only way to strike the right balance to unlock the power of technology in a way that also can be used for the greater good of society, which is really what we're aiming for here.
Thank you, Diana. And obviously, this is an alliance, Agile Nations, so an international endeavor. And why is this important for a startup like yours, or as you said, also for smaller companies in general?
I mean, I think that fundamentally any kind of company that wants to scale up has to really look at governance globally. And so I think that the fact that it is an international panel is obviously very welcome. There is a broad set of skills that I think are really important and approaches that are really important for the community to think about. And I think we are really needing, agile governance is very much about upskilling the government, about upskilling the regulators, about internalizing an understanding of technology, maybe really leveraging more of, CTOs and chief technology officers in the market to learn and know more about how technology guidance should be given. There's a certain level of accountability that agile governance also implies. You really want fundamentally proactive governments, proactive regulators to think in a much more deeper way rather than outsourcing the thinking when it comes to technology. It should be something that is very much mutually beneficial, incorporating innovators, points of views. Sandboxes are obviously quite exciting. Global standards are very important when it comes to interoperability, but also data. And, we need actually also to think very deeply around governance frameworks for artificial intelligence as well. So I think that when it comes to the opportunities that we have in front of us with agile governance and governments, it is one, an element of upskilling, so we're thinking of technology at a deeper level, and two, very much an approach where you're promoting standardization, where you're promoting, thanks to that deeper knowledge, things that are pragmatic and practical for implementation of better technology for society.
Diana, thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'd like to now go to Minister Pisano in Italy. Minister, today you've been recognized by Apolitical as one of the Agile 50, the 50 most influential people revolutionizing governance worldwide. Congratulations. And the award celebrates both your work to create the Torino City Lab as Deputy Mayor of Torino, which was your past position, as well as more recently as Minister of Technological Innovation. So first, tell us what does agile governance mean to you, both as a former deputy mayor and now as minister in Italy?
First of all, thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to join the panel. And I wish also to thank Apolitical for this important recognition. Experimentation is a crucial stage to make a thorough and secure assessment of the functioning, the risk, and the externalities of disruptive innovation. In 2019, in building the Torino City Lab, I had to stipulate the urban air mobility, a protocol with the Italian Civil National Authority to simplify procedures and requirements in case of drone experimentation. I was not alone. In the US, Amazon obtained the permission for air delivery in September 2020, but it cannot implement the solution on a large scale due to regulatory restrictions. Yet, the risk of depleting the industrial and economic fabric of our countries is enormous. Startups, young entrepreneurs, and even big firms may bring their ideas somewhere else. For instance, over the last decade, many OECD countries have seen an increasing survival of low productivity firms that would typically exit in a competitive market, which hamper productivity by crowding out opportunities for more productive firms, especially startups. We should create the conditions for the most innovative firms to remain and grow in our countries.
Thank you so much, Minister. I know that last week you announced the establishment of something called Sperimentazione Italia, which is supposed to enable the trialing of new ideas, products, and business models in Italy. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yes, we wish to improve our national innovation ecosystem and support experimentation of new ideas and technologies to boost talent and investment attraction. I think that we should go beyond creating and ameliorating digital services, beyond importing or procuring technology. We should be creative and encourage creativity. Invention and creativity are the key success factors for a country's economy. This is the reason we launched Sperimentazione Italia to help Italians to be more creative. In particular, we aim at solving the diffusion deficit. Technologies are developed and made available, but very often do not adequately permit society or do not gain sufficient market exposure due to inadequate regulatory regimes. Sperimentazione Italia is a provision of the Simplification and Digital Innovation Decree, and it allows Italian and international companies, startups, and research centers to test and experiment through temporary and simplified procedures. Projects that previously would have required a longer and complex approval process will now benefit from this provision. Entrepreneurs and innovators often have neither time or resources. Thus, we create a single access point. The Department of Digital Transformation, the department that I lead, and the Ministry of Economic Development are in charge of this assessment. The process is like that. Companies present their application. Within 30 days, they are expected to receive an answer, whether positive or negative one. In case of positive evaluation, they can start the testing, and any positive outcome of the experimentation will lead to the introduction of the necessary regulatory changes. However, there are some areas such as public health, environment and cultural heritage, and few others for which exemptions cannot be provided for. As you mentioned, the launch of the initiative is very recent, and we are already receiving quite a few inquiries relating to the area of mobility and robotics.
Minister, thank you. And just one follow-up question from me. Again, the international dimension of this initiative. So obviously, again, among nations with the private sector also involved. And so why is it important to Italy also, as there is a lot going on within the EU, for example, on the digital single market, etc. So how do you see the importance of an initiative like this, which spans different continents and different sectors?
The important is not only for the private sector, but it's also for the public sector, because I think that it's not only important to insert inside our country the efficiency of the solution or the digitalization of new services, but we need to create new technology, we need to create new business model, and we need to address the support of the government through that business that need our support, especially the young business. So Italy in this period, especially with the pandemic, could need some innovation to go ahead and to overcome the problem of the pandemic. But we have a lot of problem to testing a new solution, to use the drone, for example, to bring the medicine to the older people, and to use also new application to tracing the virus. So for this reason, to react immediately to some problem, to give the right opportunity to our government to increase the potential of the industry, we need to create the right regulation. It's not a question in Italy normal. We create the regulation and then we start the testing of the business because we cannot test until we do not have the regulation. So with this, with the Agile regulation and with, for example, this project Sperimentazione Italia, we can have the opportunity to see the application of new technology, of this business model, to understand the positive result, and finally, we can create a regulation that can help new business to grow and to spread their potential inside our country, even with the old industry that continues, for example, to grow always with the same path.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'd like to now turn to Chris Padilla, Vice President for Government and Regulatory Affairs at IBM. Chris, in Davos in January, we heard your commitment to agile governance with the launch of IBM's Policy Lab. Tell us more about how the lab is working with governments and what it has done this year, if you can.
Sure. Well, thank you very much to the World Economic Forum and the OECD for this opportunity and for all that you're doing on this topic. For a long time in the technology industry, what you would often hear from companies about regulation is either leave us alone or we want to do self-regulation. That was never IBM's particular message, but it was the message from quite a few folks in the tech industry generally. I think that has changed now, and certainly when we launched the IBM Policy Lab in Davos in January, what we talked about was the need for what we call co-regulation or regulation in partnership between industry and government. And that's particularly needed in the technology sector because, as Diana mentioned, the pace of innovation in this industry is so fast that it's difficult for government on its own, acting solely as a traditional regulator, to keep up with what's going on. Think about the pace of innovation in things like artificial intelligence, facial recognition, quantum computing. Not only do you have fast-paced regulation, but also in areas like quantum computing, a relatively limited amount of expertise. And that expertise tends to be mostly among researchers, particularly industry and academic researchers. So we saw a need to bring people together to talk about what emerging regulation should look like. And that was why we created the IBM Policy Lab. It's based in both Washington and Brussels because those are centers of regulatory activity for the technology sector. And the idea is to basically foster dialogue about sharing ideas for how to move forward. So for example, one of the first things we did was begin to launch policy dialogues with industry players, government officials, and folks from academia. We've held these on, for example, a recent one with the Singaporean government around regulation of artificial intelligence and blockchain technology. We did one just a few weeks ago with key people from both the US and the European Union on what the future of digital trade regulation should look like, the cross-border movement of information and data. There are many other topics. Facial recognition is one that I mentioned that where I think industry now sees an emerging need for government to act, particularly around the need for regulation on the export of facial recognition and other surveillance technologies to countries with poor human rights records. At the moment, that's an area that's largely unregulated. Industry have to make their own decisions on what to do or not do in some countries. And that poses real reputational and ethical risks. And so that's an area where we're saying, you know, we have some ideas for how government could help. Another area that I want to mention is the partnership with the OECD on artificial intelligence ethics. AI ethics is an emerging area. The OECD has brought together a variety of stakeholders to discuss that and hopefully develop consensus. The OECD is also working on digital taxation standards, an area, again, there's not a lot of clarity around how tax authorities should treat digital technologies. Tax rules were written decades ago for the transfer of physical goods, and they don't work well in an era where data is the new element of monetary value. So that's what the Policy Lab's meant to do. I think we're off to a good start. We're getting ready to celebrate a year in January, and we thought Davos and the World Economic Forum was the perfect place to launch it.
Chris, thank you. You did talk about the international dimension already, but in the film, maybe you can elaborate a little more. In the film, we heard Rosalind Doctor, your colleague, talk about the importance of global cooperation on this. So you're obviously a multinational firm operating in a lot of economies. So if you can explain to us the difference that interoperable technology frameworks can make internationally?
Well, I think what Raz was referring to there, and I want to thank her for her leadership in this initiative, is the real risk in the technology area in particular, that the global internet becomes the global splinter net. And we're already beginning to see that with divergence of regulatory approaches. Many folks talk about the differing approach to privacy, say, between the US, the European Union, and other countries like China and Russia, which are taking a very different approach. There's really a need for more international collaboration for something like the internet, which frankly depends on and is fueled by the ability to interconnect globally. If we see more separation of trade and data flows, that will have implications that are negative for technology development and innovation. And that's why we need to have more collaboration among governments. The other reason is these things are moving so quickly. I don't think any one government has a monopoly on good ideas on how to deal with, the ethics of artificial intelligence, for example. These are tough areas, and we need more collaboration. Certainly for global companies like mine, we benefit from commonality in global rules, but it's more than just about commercial benefit. It's about what I mentioned at the beginning, which is if you have more separation, completely different approaches to things like ethics, taxation, export control rules, that's not good for innovation, and it makes for a more difficult ecosystem, and that's not something that would benefit any of us.
Chris, thanks so much. And last but not least, I'd like to go to Amanda Soloway, who is the Minister for Science, Research and Innovation of the United Kingdom. Minister, welcome again. And I understand last year the UK government set out its vision to transform its regulatory system in its white paper on regulation for the fourth industrial revolution. That was the title. If you could tell us about the initiatives you have introduced to make it easier for new products and business models to come to market in your country. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be back. Our white paper sets out the plan to create a regulatory environment in which innovation can thrive, and we have made some really exciting progress. We've established the Regulatory Horizons Council, and this is an independent expert committee set to advise the government on the regulatory reform needed to support the rapid and safe introduction of technologies with high potential benefit for the UK economy and indeed society as a whole. And the current work plan includes genetic technologies, fusion energy, unmanned aircraft and medical devices. We've also we've conducted a 6-month pilot of an innovation test, and this is a series of nudges designed to encourage consideration of the impact of regulation on innovation throughout the policymaking process. And we're now looking at how to take this forward to ensure that all regulation brought forward is innovative, innovation friendly, but also innovation enabling, which of course is equally important. And we've invested £10 million in ambitious and experimental projects to enable innovation through our Regulators Pioneer Fund. Projects launched include a regulatory innovation lab to support development of autonomous shipping, a challenge competition to accelerate development of AI-powered legal services, and the development of machine-readable rules to support innovation in the financial sector. And all these measures contribute towards the innovation enabling environment essential to delivering our commitment to make the UK the best place in the world to start and grow a business.
Minister, thanks so much. If I could have just a follow-up question. So building on this work that you've done domestically, you have now joined forces with the governments of Canada, Denmark, Italy, Japan, Singapore, and the UAE to establish this Agile Nations Alliance. And its mission is, of course, to make it easier for innovation to spread more easily across the globe. So could you tell us a little, as a kind of an envoy of this initiative to the public that is listening now, could you tell us a little more about the commitment that has been reached as part of the Agile Nations?
Yes, of course. And as you say, 7 governments have established the Agile Nations as an international forum to foster cooperation on rulemaking. And as I've also mentioned, some of the things that the UK is doing to make regulatory environment more hospitable to innovation. But domestic reforms alone just aren't sufficient, and given the global reach and international connectedness of many technologies. So our aim for the Agile Nations is to work together to make it easier for our businesses to introduce and scale innovations across our markets, while at the same time continue to uphold protections for citizens and, of course, for the environment. And I'm truly excited by the opportunities that the Agile Nations presents. It's only by working together and by sharing insight, testing new innovations, and co-developing new rules that we're going to seize the potential of all these new technologies to and actually mitigate their risks. So the UK, as the chair for the first year, will work with other governments to agree and deliver an ambitious work plan. We will bring together policymakers and regulators across a range of sectors and technologies, including the green economy, mobility, medical diagnostics and treatments, and more actually, to achieve the tangible benefits that will facilitate innovation for the benefit of societies and economies. And I'm delighted by the interest of businesses in this adventure. And we are committed to developing a meaningful role for businesses to contribute to this work. There is a global pandemic tearing through our economies, we know this. And if we're able to build back better, and if we're able to address the challenges of climate change, for example, we really must seize the opportunities that innovation can offer. And we must cooperate in our efforts. And our commitment to the Agile Nations will support us in doing just that. And I'm just so looking forward to kicking off this work in the new year.
Minister, thanks so much, and thank you for the leadership of your country there, as you said. So this is really, really exciting also for the forum, and I also know for our partners at OECD. Now, thank you so much. You've been active on Q&A and chat, so I wanted to thank you for that. Maybe just take one. I understand. Let me just read it for our panelists. Julia Dijaja from ASEAN asked, after the period of sandboxing, if you will, what would be good parameters for regulators to introduce regulations? How do we avoid under or over regulations? We need to find the right balance between speed and public protection, obviously. So I think the question is, how do you really uphold public protections while delivering more agile governance of emerging technology? So that's kind of the dilemma, I think, that particularly government decision makers are facing. I'll open floor if you want to come in. Let me know. I think Mr. Pisano is asking for the floor,
okay.
Please. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, this is a complex problem because striking the right balance between an agile regulation and consumer and citizens' rights protection, I think that is a duty of the state. This is why we support the concept of experimenting within the sandbox or within a well-defined time framework and environment before making the requested regulation changes. Indeed, the subject proposing the regulatory change may contribute to the early identification of the potential issues raised by the new product or services, thus embedding specific remedies in their working framework to ensure a safe experimentation. For example, let's think about autonomous vehicles that are being experimented around the world. Developers deploy those vehicles by following a specific set of control and precaution while testing them on the road. But In some countries, including Italy, present regulation forestalls such safe experimentation, since only vehicles with a steering wheel are allowed to be driven on the roads.
Thank you so much, Minister. I don't know if Minister Soloway wanted to react as well, just to make sure on the public protection. Let me know.
Merrick, if
sorry, yes, I'm sorry. I'm happy to come in. I saw Chris's hand up.
No, go ahead, Nestor, please.
No, sorry. Just simply, domestically, we need to raise our game to embed, making sure that we have a regulation, regulating innovation. And so we just need to ensure that our policymakers and regulators have innovation-friendly regulation in their DNA. So we want to thread this through everything we do to ensure that regulatory reform, is focused on the outcomes. And I guess the most urgent need for international regulatory cooperation is in areas where the technology or the applications are so new that no country has started to regulate, and that therefore is the challenge for us. So this is where cooperation could be most effective for radical technologies on the horizon. I'm just conscious of time. I'll hand back to Chris.
Thank you, Minister. Chris Padilla.
Well, I want to agree with first what Minister Pisano said, which is, fundamentally, remember, regulation is the responsibility of the state. So when we talk about partnership and regulation, many of us can suggest ideas, but ultimately that's why we have governments to make these decisions. And as Minister Soloway said, we need to move quickly on emerging technologies. Sometimes there's a risk of moving too quickly, and sometimes governments can be reacting to public pressure. Let me give an example. After the Christchurch massacre tragedy in New Zealand, perpetrated by an Australian national, the Australian government reacted very quickly, adopting into law within about 48 hours a series of regulations requiring, for example, companies to provide backdoors to encrypted data. Now, you can understand in the aftermath of a terrible tragedy, why there might be a move in that direction. But there are many aspects of it that perhaps weren't considered, given how quickly that moved. For example, the idea of government backdoors to encrypted information is extremely controversial. It's a very big point of contention between the US and the European Union over the privacy shield, for example. So, these aren't easy decisions. Agility is important, but so is, as Minister Soloway said, cooperation. What happened in the Australia case is there was no consultation with anybody. They were on the eve of an election. There was outrage. They adopted and passed into law something very quickly that now there's a lot of discussion about needing to amend. So that's what happens when you have, maybe popular pressure and a lack of dialogue and stakeholder involvement. So it's a tough balance. Ultimately, governments have to draw those balances, and that's why we elect them to these roles.
Thank you, Chris. I think we have time for Diana's reaction. Please, Diana.
Yes, thank you. I think that one of the important points representing, I guess, the startups and the tech community on the smaller scale is that sandboxes and all of these efforts are definitely fantastic. But one of the things that we notice is that there needs to be almost a disproportionate voice of some of the smaller innovators to really take into account the changes of the technologies that we're talking about. Because obviously it's very easy to take into account how things function in the technology development for larger companies. But what you don't want is to basically end up with regulations regulation that only suits the larger companies, but then doesn't necessarily help the smaller companies to continue innovating when they already have less resources and when they have a lot less time to take part into those conversations. So I think that the best way to strike the balance is to also almost disproportionately represent the smaller companies in experimentation, so that you really understand the detail of what's required for the agile regulation to not impair innovation fundamentally.
Thank you so much, Diana. Thank you to all of you. I think there's so much we could still discuss. I see we have now a flood of questions, but we are unfortunately nearing the allocated time. But this is just the beginning. So we'll make sure, of course, that this is the launch of the initiative, and we will continue to, of course, keep you updated. So really many thanks. The Agile Nations initiative has been facilitated jointly by the World Economic Forum and OECD. And so I'd like to pass now the virtual floor here to Jeff Schlagenhauf, Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, for your closing reflections, Jeff.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to deliver closing remarks to this joint OECD WEF panel. Against the backdrop of a once-in-a-century global health and economic crisis, governments need to undertake a paradigm shift in their rulemaking activities. As countries rebuild afresh, they must ensure that innovation is not held back by outdated regulatory and governance schemes. They must strive to ensure regulations keep up with the global scale and speed of innovation to guarantee that citizens worldwide benefit from the innovation without paying a high price on their human, social, or economic rights. Ultimately, this is also about striving for our values of democratic, rules-based, and open society, the very raison d'etre of the OECD. And I'll mention here that on Monday, we will celebrate the 60th anniversary of the signing of the OECD Convention here in Paris. And I would also like to just make a comment that sort of in terms of the paradigm shift, the answer of we've always done it that way is not a good answer. We need to question always in terms of how we're dealing with rulemaking, other things. Is there a better way than what we've been doing? And I think that that's really important moving forward. A more agile and internationally coordinated approach to the regulatory governance of innovation is needed. One that supports renewed economic growth, inclusive development, and resilience to future shocks. The creation of the Agile Nations offers a chance to help turn this around, and I wish to express the OECD's full support for this initiative and my sincere congratulations for this achievement. I'm also pleased to let you know that the OECD is developing principles, so-called OECD soft law, on effective and innovation-friendly rulemaking in the fourth industrial revolution. The objective here is to help governments undertake a paradigm shift in their rulemaking activities, drawing on broader OECD efforts to support countries in dealing with the implications of technological change. With this in mind, we stand ready to foster our cooperation with the World Economic Forum, governments, and businesses, and share the work that the OECD is developing in this area. I'll pass the floor back now for you to conclude. It's been great to join you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Just to add that on the World Economic Forum side, this connects to our longstanding work on the fourth industrial revolution. So you may know we have a global network of centers in different jurisdictions where we look at how we can really collaborate or at least be interoperable, as you said, Diana, around technology governance internationally. And you can find, of course, more information on our website. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Jeff, for the great partnership. You can find out more about the Agile Nations on the World Economic Forum website. And I think my colleague, Chris, also shared it on the chat here. Of course, we'd love to expand the circle here. So we look forward to expressions of interest and how we can spread this this good work around the world and really have even more impact together. I'd also like to tell you that we, of course, announced Minister Pisano as one of the Agile 50 winners of Apolitical, and the remaining 49 will be announced immediately after this meeting on the Apolitical website, so you can tune in there to see who the 49 ones are as well. So again, big thank you to all of you from Geneva, and this is just the start of the journey, so looking forward. All the best.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you very much.